Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Cabra Matters. My name is Rob. I'm joined by Will and Hien. We're pastors of the English congregation, and we're here for another episode, and this week it's called Perfecting Colombo. Now, just before we dive into it, just to give you a bit of a preface, if you hear some background noises, some kids shouting, sometimes screaming at each other, it's because we're recording in our own homes, and we have our families in the background, and so please do excuse those interruptions. They're good interruptions. We hopefully won't have too many of them. We're currently in lockdown. That being said, we still hope this episode bears fruit for you and for our church, and for whoever else is tuning in, so that we can be better witnesses of the gospel to our friends, our family, and our neighbors. So I'm going to throw it over to Will, who's going to bring us a bit of scripture just to start our time, reminding us on why we are doing what we're doing.
Thanks, Rob. So you said that today we're going to be talking about the chapter called Perfecting Colombo. So we've been thinking about the Colombo Tactic, which is pretty much just asking questions, being curious, finding out more about the other person's opinions and their view, asking them to substantiate their claims, and also more recently asking questions to kind of direct the conversation to make a point. And so I think today we're going to be looking at Perfecting Colombo, which is all about preparing ourselves, practicing this skill of using Colombo, because the Colombo tactic is a skill that can be refined. And it really reminds us, and also Gregory refers to this passage as well in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Let me just read it for you. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So here, I think we want to hone in and focus in on being prepared. But before we get there, I noticed that, the Apostle Peter also reminds us that we need to do this with gentleness and respect. And that is a caveat that Gregory puts in as well, because the Colombo tactic can be used maliciously. It can be used to manipulate the conversation to gain an advantage. That's not what we're on about. We're on about being winsome and gentle, and we want to respect the other person that we're talking to, because they're also a person, and they deserve respect. And it's their opinions that we're talking about, not the person. So I think keeping that in mind, we don't want to be misusing Colombo. We want to use Colombo to understand people better, because there's always a person behind the opinion, and we want to be able to refute bad opinions, and we want to persuade people with the truth. So today we're going to be focusing on what does it mean to be prepared, because he says, the Apostle Peter says here that we want to revere Christ as Lord and always be prepared to answer everyone. This is not just some people, but this is everyone who asks us. And I think the assumption is we'll be living a life or being in the world, and relating to people of different faiths, and people will then come to see that, you are different, and then they might ask you, or you might have conversations about them, about what we believe in. So what does it mean to be prepared? What does it mean to be ready to give a reason to what we believe in? And I think in today's chapter as well, Gregory summarizes it in 3 points. It is to anticipate objections. So you prepare yourself by anticipating what the other people might say in objection to what you say and what you believe. For example, they might say, who's to say that the Bible is the truth, right? That's an objection. And then if that's the first time you've heard it in a live conversation, you might be taken aback and you might not know how to respond. So preparing yourself is anticipating these things and going, how would I respond if someone says that? Or if you said, Jesus rose from the dead, they might say, what? You believe in, things that science hasn't proved or something, Then be like, if that's the first time you heard that objection, then you'd probably be stumped and you don't know how to respond. So one way of preparing is to anticipate objections and think about it beforehand. Oh, how are we going to respond if someone asks this kind of question? What kind of questions would you ask in follow-up? The second thing is to reflect after the convo. So, we're going to have lots of conversations throughout our life with different people. And I think recording this podcast for me has been personally helpful because it also helps me reflect on some of the things that I've said in the past with people, different various conversations. And so we want to reflect on it and think about how we went so that we're more prepared for the next time we talk to someone else. And a similar topic might come up. And the third way is to practice then how you would respond. By practicing, it's kind of like not just thinking about it, but actually maybe verbalizing it, or getting someone alongside you, like a Christian brother or sister, and going, oh, I had this conversation with someone the other day, and it went like this. Like, how should I approach it next time if something similar comes up? How should I respond? What are some of the ways I should be thinking, or where can I direct the conversation? And then just practice that with another person. So those are the three ways I think that he suggests that we can be prepared to give a reason for the hope that we have. Yeah, and I think it comes down to, it's hard to be clever and to think on the spot, right? Because a lot of people, you think that, oh, this person is so clever, he's so witty, he can think on the spot, but actually maybe it's because they're really prepared, right? The classic example is Winston Churchill. He practiced he's a great orator. Back in World War II in England, he was a prime minister. He gave great speeches, and sometimes it looked like he's just saying things off the cuff, but he actually did a lot of preparation, and he even looks like he's like saying things off the cuff, but he's actually prepared.
And what I really liked about this chapter was how he shared with us his mistakes. So I personally don't like making mistakes, but then he just basically says bluntly, in real life situations, you're going to make mistakes. I was like, okay, fair enough. And then he actually goes on and shares with us his mistakes. One was, for example, in one conversation, the lady says to him after church, I'm a Christian and a Buddhist and a pagan. And his first instinct response was, well, it sounds to me like you don't know very much about those religions. It's like, whoa, turn down the heat. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was a bit worn out or stressed, and he just kind of shot back. That was one mistake, and then he thought about how he could have answered it better. Another one was a question about abortion. Where do you stand on abortion? What do you say to that? Another one was someone said to him, people are twisting the Bible all the time. They make it say whatever they want. So he was in a sense being attacked with that, and he didn't know quite kind of what to say or how to handle it. He just felt dissatisfied. And I just found that really quite affirming, because I naturally think back to some conversations I've had, and then I think, oh, I didn't do very good at that. What could I have done better next time? But that's exactly what we're meant to be doing, right? We're actually meant to, we have a go, we reflect over how it went, we learn for next time, and then we just keep kind of refining and not being afraid to refine. I think would be something, how I translate this, like what he's teaching us. For me personally, don't be afraid to just keep kind of having a go, making mistakes, refining and getting better.
Yeah, and like as I was reading that, it just reminded me of when I was a lawyer, and I was in litigation, and so that just means I've got to go prepare to go to court and represent our client. Well, I was representing the tax office, so the Commission of Taxation, and this was my first time in court, and I've had my training. I know what to do. I know how to answer questions. I know all those things, right? And I knew what I was going to present before the registrar on the day. And when I got called up, I was so nervous, right? And then the registrar, I think they just know who's fresh meat, and they just know who to pick on. And so So the registrar just asked me a whole bunch of questions that he doesn't need to ask, right? Because the case is quite procedural. He just go in, looks at the stuff, all the documents are there, everything's done according to the procedures, and then all he needs to do is just like, okay, done, kind of thing, right? But he asked me some random questions that I didn't anticipate. He's just like, oh, are you sure this happened within the required time frame? And I'm like, yeah, it should be as the file says. And he's okay. What's the date supposed to be? And then I'm like scrambling around, looking at my thing, and then going, oh, I'm sorry, registrar, I don't have a calendar with me. And then he just looked at me and shook his head, and then he just looked at it and he worked it out and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's okay. But it was quite an embarrassing moment for me. And then later on, as I reflected, I was like, oh, in those times, I remember my training, he says, if they ask you a question that you can't answer on the spot, then instead of like, I shouldn't have thrown it back at him and said, oh, I don't have a calendar with me, blah, blah, blah. I should have just asked him to adjourn for a little bit, like stay the matter, take another case up, go ask someone else to present their case. And then gives me time to look for the answer and then get called back later and then give him the straight answer, right? And because I made that mistake, because I was humiliated in front of everyone, and because I was like, I learned from that mistake. Now I know. And every other time when I was up there in court and I didn't have an answer straight away, I just asked to have more time. And then I just call another matter up and I'll just have time to look through my notes to find whatever I need. Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the same idea, right? Like you even though you might be caught off guard, but you get to reflect, learn from your mistakes, and so next time you're more prepared.
Yeah, and out of the three of us, you're the one who's older and I'd say wiser and more experienced. I'd be really keen to hear, what are some mistakes, if you don't mind sharing, that you've made? Maybe just pick your top one. And yeah, what happened?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, what kind of mistakes. I think in general, the mistakes would be the first one where you put the other person down, or you sort of try to win the argument by belittling the other person. I think I do that quite regularly. Like, I can't pinpoint it to a particular situation, but I do remember a lot of times that I belittle or outsmart the other person. And I think the result was the other person was just trying to outsmart back, so it became a competition. Who's the better one? And yeah, so I think that's my biggest biggest mistake. I mean, like, flaw in how I deal with some situation.
Hold that thought, because later we'll have some suggested reflection questions, which I'd be keen for us to draw down on. What can we do next time, for example? Yeah, so we can kind of just learn from each other and grow together. My version of, my mistake was, there was this one time where I was door knocked, and this person it was this middle-aged man, spoke a bit of broken English, and he basically put on a really elaborate story saying that he needed to, his bike was broken down, he lived near an RSL club a few suburbs away, and he just needed some money to catch a taxi home. And he was just really desperate about it, and it was just like, oh, can you spare me some money, even $5, maybe 10? And then at the time, it was just a really bad time. It was 5 o'clock, which, if you're a parent, you'll know that it's, you're meant to be at home and help out with the family. I was holding one of my kids who was crying, and here's this person door knocking and pressuring me for money. And so for me, I was completely off guard. I wanted him to just go away and leave me alone. And at the same time, I kind of knew that I shouldn't trust this guy. But then I was like, all right, whatever, I'll just give you some money. So I gave him, I think, $10, 15 even. And then he walked off. Afterwards, I shared with my missus, and she got quite frustrated at me. She was like, Rob, you're very trusting as a person. You do realize that person was probably lying, right? And then I was like, oh yeah, true. Okay, I'll follow him. and let's see where he goes. Does his story check out? And so here I am, like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, walking up and down my street, kind of tailgating this guy. And he was just kind of walking up and down the street. I'm like, oh, what's he doing? He really isn't getting a taxi. Oh, now what? Do I confront him? Do I not confront him? And then he starts to turn around after I'm tailgating him. And so we had this awkward exchange for like 2 seconds where he was looking kind of in my direction and I was looking in his direction. And I thought, oh, actually, I should probably just turn around now and walk back to my house. And then he starts calling out. It's like, hey, as if I think he was going to ask me for some more money because he couldn't recognize me. And then afterwards I turned around and then he was gone. And to this day, I don't know where he went. I don't know how he disappeared so quickly. And then I thought about that encounter. And then this is what I've learned. Never give money when someone asks for money, no matter how elaborate their story sounds, no matter how sympathetic they might make me want to feel towards them. If I actually want to help them, it's not giving them money. It's actually following through with their request. So for example, with this one, if he's like, oh, I need to catch a taxi home, I'm like, I will call a taxi for you and I will pay for it. And then that puts the ball back in his court, and then he'll say, oh, no, actually, no, I don't want that. Sorry. Okay, if that's the case, it probably means he just wanted the money for some drugs or some smokes or whatever. If he does actually want it, I'm like, oh, cool, I've actually helped him. And so I'm actually, since I learned that, and since I got pummeled at home for my response at the time, and I've learned from it. And there was another time now, it's just instinctive now, when someone asks me for money off the street. Someone did this to me a while ago and said, oh, pay me, can I have money? I was just walking down the street. They said to me, oh, can you give me some spare change? Give me some money. Whatever you give me, I'll pay you back double the amount. And I was just like, come on, you're not going to do that. Sticking in my head. But then I basically said to him, oh, what do you need it for? Oh, I just want to buy some food. I was like, oh, I'll buy you some lunch. Can I go buy you some lunch? And then after that, he was just like, oh, no, I don't want it. And then he just walked off. And so I think in those kind of situations, like, it's not exactly like a gospel encounter, but it was like a mistake that I learned, and now I'm kind of refining it. What do I do when someone asks me for money off the street?
Yeah, so it sounds like you did some reflection, and Mello helped you to reflect a little bit as well.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's good to have that response, right? You do something, and then whether the outcome was good or bad, that we reflect on it, and especially if it's to do with like a gospel conversation, right? Whether the outcome is good or bad, you can reflect on it, and then kind of like hones our skill in being able to communicate the gospel with more clarity, being more winsome and so on. And so some of the suggestions that Gregory has made in his book about some of the questions to ask yourself in reflection, like I'm just gonna rattle out a list, and then if you guys have any other suggestions of good reflection questions, we could add them to the list if we want as well. So the first question he kind of asks is like, how did I do? Like, just a general question. How do you think, you went in the conversation? And then just, was it good? Was it bad? Just write it down. How did you feel about it and why? Then afterwards, just go, well, then you can ask a more specific question. How could I have been more effective? Right. So then this is the question about, well, if the conversation went well, how can you do better? Right. Were there any points that you could have made clearer? Were there any questions that you could have asked that would have made a point better? How could I have been more effective? The next question is even more concrete. It's like, how could I have asked different questions? And then you can go on a little journey about, okay, if I ask this question instead, where would that lead? Right. So for example, Hien, when you meet Jehovah's Witnesses, your stocks question is, oh, don't you want to be part of the 144? And that gets them thinking about something, and they usually just say, nah, I'm happy being in paradise, right? So maybe a question to go, well, is there a different question you can ask to elicit a different response, to be more effective in the conversation with a Jehovah's Witness? And I think for me, when I when I spoke to Jehovah's Witness in the past, I used to just butt heads with them about the deity of Jesus Christ. Oh, have you read John? What does John say about Jesus? And then they whip out their Bible when their Bible is slightly edited, and and we talk about it. And then I remember one time I was in college and I had a little bit of Greek, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna bring out the Greek. But then it's not effective, because they're entrenched in their position about Jesus. I'm entrenched in my position about Jesus, and we're just butting heads. And then so how can we be more effective? And then I thought about the because I talked to Hien about it like ages ago, and he talked about the 144,000 as well. So I thought I'd try it. But I haven't been able to. The last time we bumped into a JW, he just kind of bubble bashed us. Remember at McDonald's?
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah, it was hard to get a foot into the conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, like what do we do with that next time?
Yeah. What do we do with that? We could ask more questions, I guess.
Yeah, or like just be really assertive back, more than what is comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could think about different questions to ask that might get you somewhere. Because a question, they might be prepared for a particular type of question, but if you ask a different question, maybe you could get a different response. I don't know. Hien, have you ever tried different questions with Jehovah's Witnesses before?
I do have different questions, but it generally is just on the fly. But I think with the just feedback, just thinking how you would do it better next time, just rehearsing it, putting it down. I think that's quite helpful, and it just keeps you on the ball with things. And I was going to say before that the process of reflecting or just thinking what you can say, what next. You do that naturally, like we're just talking like, in all different situations, you do it naturally in life with all different situations where you just, look back at what just happened or whatever. And then you reflect of what could have been if you did this, or what could have been if you said that. And so it's a natural response. And I think with this chapter 8 of Greg, he sort of hones that natural thing that we do in other areas to really presenting the gospel, or presenting an alternative, or not alternative, but to correct a point of view or opinion, and just practicing that in that mode. And as I was just was reading it, and I was thinking, why don't I do that? Well, I do that normally in other situations. Why don't I do that in my encounters with people? And I'm thinking, I think this chapter just highlights us to really work on that more, is to use what we really do with the encounters that we have. And one of the things I was just thinking of, in preaching, you do that in preaching. You preach, and then you think back, and then you go, oh, if I practice it, I'm prepared. If you finish your script early, you can go outside and verbalize what you've written down, and that way you're prepared. And all that is what you do in other areas of life.
You do this for home mods as well. So if you're not aware of Hien's skill set, he's quite good. He's renovated 4 homes by himself, and I'm sure the 3rd or 4th home was probably slightly renovated better than the first home, because you would have had practice and you would have made mistakes, and now you've learned from them. So is that something you just think about, or do you write it down, or do you talk to other people? I'm just trying to think about, like, if I was someone listening to this, trying to refine my conversations with people in the future, is it something like you pick up a journal from Kmart and just write in it, or do you talk to someone about it? Do I just think about it? What are you guys' takes on that?
I think writing it down is helpful. We're not in that culture where we write things down. We all say, we listen to it, but then we forget. I think just reflecting in writing down or recording is helpful, but it's a lost art. I admit for myself that I don't do that as much as I should. But I think writing it down is the go.
I've personally, try to write down just reflections on whatever I find important to reflect about during the day. Usually it comes down to, when I get frustrated at the kids, and then I'll write down, later that night, I'll have some time to just process my thoughts, and then I write it down. What happened, and what could have gone better? Why was I frustrated? What was the good that I wanted to maintain? What was my expectations? How did the kids respond? How could I have done better next time? All those things, ask those questions. And I find that helpful because then next time something like that happens, then at least I'm aware of what I've reflected on. Another good one, is talking to people, right? Like, Rob, you mentioned briefly in your story that you told Mello what you did with the guy, you just gave him money. She's like, Rob, she had her 2 cents, and that helped her reflect. Right. And I find it really helpful to chat with Beck and other people about some of the things I'm reflecting through. Talking with you guys too. When we have meetings, we don't just have meetings to discuss the things that we're planning for church, but we also talk about how we're going and reflecting on various things as well. And it's good to have each other to help each other. Yeah. And you, Rob?
Oh, I just do both. So for the tradie stuff, I just think about it. Like it's not like I write notes or anything. For posh, like conversations, usually I like talking to someone about it. If there's no one to talk to about it, I'll write it down. It's just, I think, a combination of all three.
And I think the other one is when you go away, you do a bit of research yourself, like with renovating, tiling, whatever. I'm just doing it out of my own head space, but then I'm thinking I'm doing all this wrong, so I look at someone else doing it on video and see what they do and see a view video. So a bit of research goes a long way. So write it down, talk to someone, do a bit of research. And I think we can use that skill in this chapter. This chapter highlights that, using all those skills in this chapter. We're being ready for any question that people ask us.
And so that's kind of like the next list, the thing on the list for the reflect on. Like, is there any knowledge that I need to brush up on? Because you might be talking about a topic, a subject matter that you're not really familiar with. Right? For example, I don't know, women's rights or something, or whatever. Like, you're just like, I don't really know much about it. You can ask them questions, right? Colombo them, what's their view on certain things. But I remember when I was talking to my maths PhD friend, and he has a interest in philosophy, and he just talked about all these things, and I didn't really know what he was talking about. So I just asked him some questions, which was pretty cool, but I still didn't really get him. And then so if I reflect on that, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can read up on some of these philosophers and stuff like that to kind of get a grasp of what they actually mean when he uses these terms. So there's any knowledge I need to brush up on, and then the other ones are just values that we have. Like, could I have maneuvered with more tactical wisdom? So can I ask different questions, or did I bring it to a direction that led to a dead end, or that actually opened up possibilities? And then the last one was my manner attractive, right? So I remember one time I was talking to my friend, non-Christian friend, and I read the Bible with him a few times, and and then I think we stopped for a while, and then I just challenged him in a friend, like a group gathering. We were talking about it again, and then the question about reading the Bible and Jesus came up again, and then I was talking to him, and I didn't feel like I sounded angry or pushy, but then afterwards Beck told me, she's like, Will, did you know you sounded pretty frustrated and pushy when you were talking to your friend? And I was like, oh, no, I didn't know that. I was just trying to persuade him. But she helped me see what I didn't see, that my manner wasn't attractive. Like, I came across as, pushy and frustrated. And I guess that would have then meant my friend would have responded more defensively, and he was, because I ramped up the persuasiveness because I sensed that he was getting more defensive. So yeah, I didn't realize that at the time, but now I know that sometimes I might get a little bit intense. Yeah, and so that was helpful for me to reflect on.
Yeah, so having some feedback is also really, really good, because sometimes it's like, I intend to be gentle, but it actually comes across as very brash or rude, basically. Yeah, so it's just having someone point that out is super helpful.
Yeah, and I think the last one was like practice your new approach out loud. So if you thought of different things to say, or different questions to ask, or a particular turn of phrasing that you want to use next time, it's good to practice out loud. And I always hear this story. It's in a preaching context about John Chapman. So he's a legendary Aussie preacher. And I can't remember who tells this story. I think it was Philip Jensen. Tells a story where John Chapman would call him up and just tell him a joke on the phone. It's just like, hey, and then he tells him the joke, and then it's just like, why are you calling me to tell me a joke? And it's because he's practicing. He's practicing how to tell a joke, because you can't just tell a joke once. You got to practice it, because you got to know when to come in with a punchline. It's an art, but some people can tell jokes better than others, and so practice it. And even the greatest, like even the legendary John Chapman, practices telling jokes and stuff. And we said before, like, we practice our sermons as well. We verbalize things, so it helps to be able to practice saying things out loud. And usually you do that with a friend, a Christian brother or sister. Yeah. I think the other thing that I find helpful in the book was his distinction between, are you refuting something or are you persuading someone? And if you're refuting something, then you probably want to be like a little bit more forceful. Like you can be a little bit more forceful if they're trying to attack, something that the truth or something, or they want to attack Christianity, and you want to refute a wrong idea that they have. Then you may need to be a little bit more forceful in your questioning. But if you're persuading someone, because I think he also mentions that if you're refuting something, your audience might not necessarily be the person you're talking to, but those who are listening. So you need to be convincing to those who are listening rather than the person that you're talking to. Just depends on the context. And then if you're persuading someone, then the general rule is you want to be more genial. You want to be more like gentle when you're trying to persuade someone, rather than forceful with your opinion.
Yeah, and that's all really helpful, because normally I'd think of this as previously I would think of this as a one-size-fits-all approach of just trying to Colombo a person and just ask questions, get them to talk. But he gave us 3 different kind of settings, and in these 3 different settings you can use different things. So in a one-on-one conversation, you probably don't want to just refute the other person. You'll make them, you might end up belittling them or making them feel small or hurt. You actually want to just be genial and ask them questions, get them to talk, get them to open up. In a setting where it's like just a group, maybe like a group of friends, well, it depends on what's happening. Like, you could just ask questions, or if the person starts to attack and ramp it up a bit, then maybe you can start to refute. But that's the second one, so either or. And then in a last setting, which is like a more hostile setting, potentially like a debate, for example, like a TV show, not that we go on TV shows, but if you were in some sort of a debate and yet other people listening in, and the other person's just kind of fully attacking you, at that point you can just get them to prove their arguments, get them to slow it down, get them to refute the evidence basically at that point. And so you're still coming across as gentle and respectful, but then at the same time the onus is on the other person to prove their argument, and at that point you can kind of step in a bit. And so I just find that helpful. Like, I think it just depends on the setting, depends on the context, on which method you go with.
Yeah, and I think it's a general rule, like, because we're Christians, we want to have charitable assumptions on the other person. We don't want to assume the worst of them. We don't want to assume that they're out there to get us, unless proven that they are. Then we have reason to like treat them that way. But I think we want to be charitable with people. and as a general rule to have in our conversations. So, application points. What should we do with this?
Practice more.
Practice more. Yep.
I mean, like
Maybe.
practicing the process.
Yeah, I think one concrete thing we could do is, just think about a recent conversation you had with a non-Christian, and just reflect on it while asking yourself those questions. What went well, what didn't go well, any missteps, any knowledge you could grow in. Could I've asked different questions, all those questions. Yeah. And I think, especially now during lockdown, I want to encourage you guys to give one of your non-Christian friends a call. Yeah, give him a call and not expect to have a, conversation about Jesus, but just give them a call and check in on them, see how they're going during the lockdown. Show that you care. Yeah. And I think it's a great opportunity because most of us are working from home anyway, or studying, or not, or still on uni break or whatever. It'd be good to call them and check in and see how they're going.
All right. Well, unless anyone has anything to add, I'd say that just about wraps up this week. Perfecting Colombo takes time. Anticipate any objections, reflect over the conversation, and practice for next time. That's the big picture summary for the chapter. We hope that this episode has been helpful for you, and pray that you'll keep refining your processes and conversations, and keep growing in our encounters with our family and friends and neighbors who don't know Jesus. Until next time, we'll hear. Hopefully, you'll tune in next time. We'll see you next time.